get started and give a presentation today on our work on the Portal Doors project, which began 15 years ago in 2006 and has since evolved into what we call the NPDS Cyberinfrastructure. Brief overview where I will try to discuss what some of the motivating problems have been from our perspective, which is oriented towards medical applications in brain imaging, but also try to address the architectural design solutions and then the concrete implementation goals with actual software. First section, where I will review briefly brain imaging. We have an interest in focusing on dementias and pharmacogenomic molecular imaging, which I'll explain. Just to get a sense of what's involved here. This is a PET scan for Alzheimer's disease. It's a single mode, which is PET or positron emission tomography. Here our data gets more complicated because we now have two modes with both PET scans and MR scans. This application is Parkinson's disease. Now we go up to add a third mode. So now we're looking at both PET scans, MR scans, and then the third mode is magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So our data sets can be multimodal and quite large and complicated. It gets more fascinating when we start addressing what we call gene-brain behavior relationships and address study of the genotype-phenotype correlation problem. This particular example slide comes from Henry Wagner, a very well-known and respected nuclear medicine physician who was drawing attention to the study of this PET scan in the use of looking at levels of enzyme activity. MAO is the enzyme, and its relationship to behavior, in particular anger, distress, upset, all the way to violence with the image of the staff who are trying to restrain an individual who's throwing punches. So, but we can also look at molecular genetic imaging to evaluate the activity of reporter genes and the difference between all these different modalities of imaging relates to when do we know? How soon do we know? Is it early enough that we can actually intervene appropriately and maybe slow the progression of the disease, or perhaps even cure the disease? So that's one of the main advantages of getting earlier into the sequence. Let me just move forward on this explanation of pharmacogenetic molecular imaging with this display of a 6-panel image, and we're mostly concerned from a bioinformatics or clinical medical informatics from this perspective in the bottom row in the middle. We want to be able to understand our different patient groups for when is a drug beneficial or not beneficial, when is a drug toxic or not toxic. So in that 2x2 analysis, we get 4 groups. And this is creates overall, with all these different modes and kinds of data, it's really a data mining grand challenge. But it's also a data integration and fusion problem because we have so many different layers of scale and complexity to our data from the lower level at the genome with genetic tests to brain imaging, where we have imaging biomarker phenotypes, all the way up to the human behavioral level, where we have clinically observed behavior as well as a variety of psychometrics from questionnaires or extracted feature sets from the clinical medical record. We have attempted to build our approach to analysis of all this data with what has evolved into NPDS. This is an example registry where you're seeing mostly a list of organizations, but the data records can involve any kind of entity. We also relate it to semantic analyses with ontologies. This particular example demonstrates this concept of pharmacogenomic molecular imaging, where an investigator asks a pharmacological question using a genetic test as well as a molecular imaging procedure. We want to be able to explore and data mine an extensive collection of data using our approach. So let me go back to the beginning of the Portal Doors project and do a brief review of the engineering side with the development of our software over the years. In one simple sort of snapshot summary of what NPDS has become, fundamentally, it's a distributed cyber infrastructure for data repositories intended to manage both online and offline entities. We have evolved it into what has become a read-only API for the NPDS read-only services, including lexical portal registries, semantic doors directories, a combined approach, which we call nexus directories. That's a combination of directory and a registry. And then we have separated out the read-write API into the scribe registrars. As one of our driving or motivating goals, we'd like to be able to perform automated meta-analysis. So I'll try to now go into more of the details of this history and review. The very first proposal for this design was actually done in 2006, and it appeared in IEEE online in 2007. There was a pretty important update where this notion of metadata about metadata and the HDMM architectural style was discussed in 2010. Well, actually, that work was done in 2009, but it appeared in 2010. In 2016, we really transitioned to the separation of scribe as our registrar approach, because previously it had sort of been lumped together into nexus. So nexus had previously been directories and registrars. We separated that out because we felt that was important. A more recent 2019 update, we renamed our original Portal Doors principles the Dream principles. And here's a 2020 update where we're trying to also build out what we call our links. So learning intelligence and knowledge system. So what is the essence of all this, and what are its foundational concepts? Certainly, intentionally at the beginning, portal doors was modeled as an analog or analogy for the semantic web to what had previously been achieved for the original lexical web. And we were attempting to address a number of critical problems that, frankly, have only gotten worse. So spread of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, unfortunately, has only gotten worse. I'm not sure that anyone could persuade me that the cyber silo problem has really been solved. My opinion is that no, it has not yet been successfully solved. Again, our motivating applications involve the study of brain imaging, gene-brain behavior relationships, their applications to clinical trials. So we hope to use our approach actually for clinical trial registries where we track all the various entities that we must study within the clinical trial, including both the actual participating patients, but also the brain scans that we gather. Back to this problem of cyber silos. This has had a long invested history, certainly examples such as CA-BIG from the National Cancer Institute. How well have we succeeded over the past 2 decades? I remain of the opinion that maybe all we've done so far is to replace traditional silos by cyber silos. I'm not yet convinced that we've been able to build truly interoperable informatics systems. I'm not yet convinced that there is the freely flowing exchange of information. As another important problem that we're hoping to address, that's the one of how do we do something like a literature review in today's world where there just is continuing to be, some people call it tsunami, tidal wave explosion in the growth of the numbers of papers that are published of varying quality, some good, maybe some not so good. How do we gather meaningful and relevant evidence? And in this example, I'm talking about scientific hypothesis that is addressed in a clinical trial. So in this example, where it did a simple search on tauopathy and frontotemporal dementia, just by examining Google Scholar, what do you do with 14,000 hits? It's just not possible for an ordinary person, an ordinary human investigator, to work with 14,000 hits. So then what do you do? Discuss a situation with your colleague, query a cyber silo database. And when you do so, what do you get back from that cyber silo? Do you get results with enough breadth and depth, or do you get results with too much breadth or depth? And how do you even know? So, can we build software solutions that actually do or make some kind of initial automated attempt at a meta-analysis of the published literature? And what would it involve? Well, some of the basics that are available in software engineering in today's world, it typically involves things such as NLP, use of a natural language processor, semantic reasoning engine, et cetera. Are you going to be doing SQL queries? Are you going to be doing Sparkle queries? Are you going to be examining a lexical database, semantic database? How are you going to analyze the statistics, et cetera? But now what about this problem that I'm still, or that we in the Portal Doors project are are still struggling with regard to cyber silos. When is it good to have a cyber silo? When is it not so good to have a cyber silo? And can we, in fact, search not only within a problem-oriented domain, but can we search across problem-oriented domains? In this short list of problem-oriented domains, I list some of the problem-oriented directories that we've been trying to prototype and develop and work with as a demonstration of what we're hoping to achieve. Certainly, excuse me, apologize. In those problem-oriented areas that are of relevance to what we're hoping to do in medicine and biology and pharmacogenomic molecular imaging. So let's add those back into this design vision where now you see the inclusion of our portal registry doors directory. That also could have been a nexus directory there. And we have scribe registers, which import and or enter into our repositories the necessary records. And you'll see some other notes here, for example, the importance of providence. Providence has always been a part of the Portal Doors project from the very beginning, going all the way back to 2006. Providence is absolutely critical to the sourcing and tracking of data, especially when we're talking about patients who are suffering some kind of disease. And we have to be able to know what we're getting from whom. And then, of course, we have all the necessary regulatory requirements of security, confidentiality, et cetera, in America under the HIPAA laws. So these are not trivial matters. And at the same time that we want to be able to both search within and across repositories, when we do search within a given repository or problem-oriented domain, we want to be able to maintain the integrity of that problem-oriented domain. So how do we do that in a way that makes sense? We use a variety of concept validating approaches to either include or exclude the record. And of course, when we exclude a record from a given problem-oriented domain, that doesn't mean that we remove it from the system. It just means that we place it in a different, more general or more appropriate directory instead of the one where it does not belong. So what is the main advantage of this approach? Hopefully, when we do search within a problem-oriented domain, we can be more efficient because there are no irrelevant records for that problem domain that would otherwise enlarge the search space. But at the same time, we can focus our search in different ways at different times throughout the overall process, such that do we search within a given problem-oriented domain? Do we search somewhat larger scope across related domains, or do we go completely globally across all domains? Nevertheless, we do take the approach based on the philosophy of the original design for Portal, where Portal, actually the acronym came from Problem-Oriented Registry. So a focus on a particular a domain. In this example, it's CT gaming that came from clinical telegaming. And so what are the concepts in this particular example of clinical telegaming? Really just three. There's the concept of clinical care. There's the concept of telecommunications, which is more otherwise stated as telemedicine or telecare or telemonitoring. There are any number of teles here. But there is also this notion of gaming, which is definitely not anything related to gambling. It's actually just ordinary, simple video games or any kind of interactive environment that comes across as entertaining for the sake of the patient. The goal is to engage the patient in the entertaining games such that they actually participate. This is especially beneficial for rehabilitation of stroke victims who may have lost the ability to control their arm or hand. And it helps motivate recovery and rehabilitation after having had a cardiovascular accident that resulted in a stroke. So, this example has three simple concepts that define inclusion versus exclusion of a record in this particular problem-oriented domain called CT gaming. All right, let me move on to a section about distributed systems and architectural styles. We'll try to move quickly so that we can have at least some time for Q&A. For those of you who are familiar with distributed systems, there are a variety of different approaches, which I've listed here. I encourage you to consult the textbook of your choice. One of my favorite textbooks is Software Architecture by Richard Taylor, who has been at UC Irvine. But I'm sure you can find others. According to Professor Taylor's textbook definition of an architectural style, I have the quote here. I just, as a brief aside on REST, because this is a common misunderstanding, no, actually, HTTP protocol in XML JSON is actually not a requirement of REST. That's a very common instantiation, but it's not technically a requirement of the REST architectural style. So what is the HDMM architectural style? This was written up by me back in 2009. It was the architectural style that I extracted from both Iris DNS and then what I did for Portal Doors. So let me review that analogy and that comparison. Certainly Iris DNS began with the history of the domain name system and the Iris registry system for domain names. And of course, along the way, we've always had this problem of how to do resource identification and linking on the internet and the web. There have been a variety of approaches here. One of the important principles of the Portal Doors project is that we have never required any particular identifying requirements. So they're completely free and open as long as they are globally unique. And I'll talk more about that. But one of the points I'm making here on this slide is that none of these original systems from Iris DNS address the problem of how do we apply this to the semantic web and the use of semantic reasoners with RDF and OWL. So that's what led me to propose the Portal Doors system in 2006. And the original phrases that led to the acronyms was problem-oriented registry of tags and labels as an Iris analog, and domain ontology oriented resource system as a DNS analog. And that is summarized in this simplified, concise table, where it's just not that complicated. It's a very simple, straightforward analogy. We have entity registering and attribute publishing from Iris DNS that basically mapped IP address numbers to unique domain names. And in the Portal Doors analogy, we're proposing and implementing this analogy whereby we are trying to apply it to the semantic web. So instead of IP address numbers, we're going to be using globally unique URIs or URLs, and also using RDF triples. But fundamentally, the overall analogy holds true in terms of the HDMM architectural style. So some figures from the original papers on some of the key fields that were considered either required or permitted in terms of the data records on the portal side and the door side. And of course, when you have a nexus record, they're combined, so you get them all in a single nexus record. This slide helps to show some of the evolution of the design over the years. The very original design had just portal and doors. Then this figure shows what was the 2010 design, which added Nexus. But at that point, we were using Nexus both for registrars and what became directories. And then the 2016 design is what separated out the registrars into Scribe, so that we could use Nexus Portal and Doors as read-only and Scribe as read-write. Again, some of the key principles that characterize the overall Portal Doors project. We're still hoping to complete this transition from the old lexical web to a newer, more modern semantic web. And so the original design was done to serve fundamentally as a hybrid bootstrap and bridge. But we always wanted to make sure that it was distributed and that it permitted localized control of policies and content. Some other key points really address this matter of content control, infrastructure control. Who gets to do that? And I've made some contrasting examples here with Wikipedia and Google as two very famous examples. So let me go on to some concluding remarks about semantic search and the HDMM conjecture, which again comes from the HDMM architectural style. Brief review of how I'm using terminology here. The colloquial term dumb as a lexical system where the processor just views the data as character strings without meaning to the processing agent. In contrast, colloquial term smart, for a semantic system where presumably the processor has some understanding of the content. Why? Because it's done in reference to controlled vocabularies, otherwise known as the SORI or ontologies, and the use of RDF triples or their equivalent, where an equivalent would be any triple statement. And again, the simplest way to understand a triple statement is subject, verb, object. That is what enables the power of any semantic reasoner. Hopefully, we will be able to eventually apply these kinds of searches in a meaningful way, where we don't have the kinds of challenges that we have today, where sometimes it can be very, very difficult to find that needle in the haystack. And are we going to be able to achieve our stated goals in our application to pharmacogenomic molecular imaging, where we even look through family records that are linked by genetic pedigree? These remain very challenging problems. But certainly on a larger, more challenging and concerning level, the democratization of search, I maintain, remains critically important to preserving our American democracy. People have been talking about this for a long time before things started to get difficult, really difficult. So, for example, I've mentioned Moshowitz and Kumar. Back in 2009, IEEE Computer, they were talking about, the problems of the control of the flow of information. If we're going to preserve our democracy in America, we have to maintain democratization of search and democratization of the flow of information. Just a brief image to remind or visualize how complicated networks can be. This one from Newman's article in SciAm Review. And this question about how do we do algorithmic search in network graphs? When should we be doing peer-to-peer? When should we be doing hierarchical? What scenarios work well or not so well for different kinds of questions, depending upon whether or not that needle in the haystack is known to actually exist in the haystack, or whether you're in a situation where you do not know whether there may or may not be a needle in that haystack. I have always used this beacons of Gordor metaphor. This is from my 2010 paper in Future Internet, where the "we are here" refers to those of us who are ordinary persons, humans, down in the valley under the clouds. And how do we send messages or communicate or learn about something that may be going on in another valley, also under the clouds? Well, that was the beacons of Gordor metaphor. So this was the original HDMM conjecture back then, with the belief that eventually semantic HDMM networks should scale more effectively and efficiently than those that are purely peer-to-peer. My opinion remains that it must be some manner of hybrid that combines both hierarchical approaches across problem-oriented domains, but then, of course, peer-to-peer within problem-oriented domains, so it's a combination of both as a hybrid. A brief restatement of the DREAM principles and ferrometrics, because that came up yesterday in some discussion at yesterday's lightning talks. But we in 2019 renamed our original Portal Doors principles the DREAM principles, because we also added one very important new principle that had not been part of the original collection, and that was the equivalent entities principle. We had also been developing our approach to FAIR, for which we have a very different recursive use of the acronym FAIR and the word FAIR in a manner that is consistent with integrity with regard to fair acknowledgement of information records and fair attribution to indexed reports. I've listed a few of the recent references there, which provide more details. Our next steps for this project, we will be finalizing with version 10 of our software, PDP Dream software, concurrent with the November 8th Microsoft GA release. GA they use for general availability, RC is release candidate. So that will be out in November, and that will be available at the PDP Dream repository at GitHub. We have plenty of demonstration websites and services. I've listed the Portal Doors and NPDS links here. The subdomain NPDS is for our web services. The subdomain www is for our web applications. The future goals of the project include the development of some parallel technology independent stacks. Our main development is most complete on the Microsoft C# stack, but we are hoping and planning. There have been some minimal prototypes that have not been well developed, but we are planning eventually to add a Python Django based stack as well as a JavaScript node based stack. And that's it. There's my contact information, and you can find more information with a whole bunch of papers at our website. And with that, I will stop the screen share and take any questions. If there are any questions in either the chat or else, please just turn on your microphone and your video, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Well, there's only a few of us here, so maybe I can ask questions that are a little bit more of a discussion nature.
Absolutely.
I think your talk was nice, and that it's halfway between a practical implementation and philosophical questions.
Thank you.
I wonder, well, first off, silos in the conventional world only get knocked down when there's a compelling reason to do so as a matter of practicality. And I think we face the same thing in the cyber world. And I think many of us in research tend to look at everything we do for the purposes of research. And I'm wondering, in your medical applications, are there other kinds of practitioners that maybe aren't involved in the research enterprise that still would derive some other benefit from the data that you have, that would create an incentive to have those silos knocked down, as an example.
Well,
Medical safety is a huge issue, right?
yeah,
And it
absolutely.
has very little to do with specific conditions, but it's one of those areas where people are incentivized to share information to increase safety. Is there a parallel in your world?
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you partially, but not completely. So let me clarify as possible, as best I can. I appreciate your question, and it really leads me to clarify. I don't want anyone to think, certainly not you or anybody else, to think that I'm trying to say that cyber silos are bad in and of themselves. I think, or that they, to use your expression, should be knocked down. I don't want to knock down anything. So I would clarify by saying, I do not want to knock down anything. I am well aware of vested interests, and vested interests have a way of remaining vested. So that's not the goal here. The goal here is for any given cyber silo, to find a way to make it interoperable. So can we add a intermediary or transition layer that helps make it interoperable? With the notion of about meta and the notion of importers, exporters, or converters, hopefully we can make existing cyber silos interoperable by adding the necessary interfaces so that we do not have to knock them down. So I think that's an important philosophical point that I will always now remember to make in the future. So thank you for your question.
So the goal is to basically make people aware that the information is there, not necessarily to have access to the information from a different source.
So some of the notions about meta and interoperability involve how do we in fact make data available to those who need it and want to use it in a way that is user-friendly, easily accessible, which answers the other part of your question, which is, yeah, I mean, we want to make stuff available to the patient participants who contribute to our clinical trial. So how do we make our stuff available to those who volunteer to participate in clinical trials? We believe that we have to find positive, healthy, constructive ways to incentivize folks to do the right thing that helps others in support of their neighbors, in support of community, or in support of those who might be like them. Now, generally, there's a good percentage of patients who are suffering a debilitating disease who are more than happy to participate in a clinical trial because they do believe that the results may not benefit them, but maybe it'll benefit their children, or maybe it'll benefit their relatives, or maybe it'll benefit their neighbors. So there are a good number of folks who are willing to contribute to a clinical trial, volunteer for the clinical trial. But to answer your question, we want to make our stuff available to them. So ordinary lay persons who actually participate and contribute. So at our not-for-profit, Brain Health Alliance, we talk about serving all interested parties, serving all stakeholders. Do not limit it to just those of us who are geeks.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Appreciate the question. If there are no other questions, it's the end of time. So I'll thank you for joining me this morning and participating in this working session. And with that, I will close the session. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.